Welcome to the fourth of 5 sessions in our series on sense making. I'm Diane Johnson, a regional teacher partner with PEMSR, and I'm excited to help you and your colleagues deepen your understanding of sense making and science. In the first session, we viewed sense making at the 50,000 foot level and were introduced to the critical attributes of sense making. In the subsequent sessions, we have been examining each attribute more closely and gaining resources and strategies to support implementation. In this session, we will dive into leveraging students' ideas, which includes developing a safe, risk-free classroom culture and considering how to use the assets and resources each student possesses. Session 4 addresses a question: how can I leverage students' ideas to support sense-making in science? Using a sense-making frame for instruction promotes deep learning. This slide depicts a brain-compatible model for learning developed by Brian Goodwin at McCrell. In session 1, we found that using a sense-making frame for instruction is congruent with our current understanding of how learning becomes part of our long-term memory. And just looking at this particular model, and thinking about the role that phenomena plays in one of those critical attributes for sense making, it really helps address these first 3 components of this model of learning, just trying to get ideas into our working memory so that we can do more with them and begin to make sense of learning, and then getting actual time to practice and rehearse it. And ultimately, it goes into our long-term memory where we can use it to extend and apply to other situations. So using a sense-making frame of instruction is really one that mirrors what we know about how we learn. In sessions 2 and 3, we saw how using a sense-making frame flips what we may have experienced as students ourselves upside down to focus on students coming to understand important science ideas by making sense of phenomena. And so instead of the information frame of instruction that many of us had an experience with as learners, where scientists and teachers just dispensed information. We were the knowers of all, and some kids got it that way. It made sense to them. But we want all students to understand important science ideas. And so that's the focus from a sense-making frame of instruction. We want all students to come to have this understanding of science disciplines by making sense of phenomena, and students being scientists and engineers in their approach to figuring things out. And as teachers, we have a lot of heavy lifting to do in planning those opportunities for students, identifying those instructionally productive phenomena, and then orchestrating and facilitating students' understanding as they come to figure out that phenomena that we've used for them to know important science ideas. And as we think about this idea of sense making, and we've looked at these different attributes of sense making, equity was always at the center of sense making in science. We want all students to be supported in learning important science ideas. That's the what of sense making. And they do this by figuring out engaging phenomena. That's the why of sense making. And this is accomplished by leveraging students' ideas. This is the how of sense making, as well as using science and engineering practices, which is the rest of the how, and we'll be exploring that in session 5. Before we begin, take a minute to gather the materials we will use for this session. They are linked in the description below. The selected resources document contains links to all the materials used or referenced in this segment. In order to answer our question, how can I leverage students' ideas to support sense-making in science? We have 2 big goals that we're going to tackle. The first is, how can we determine ways to establish and maintain a supportive classroom culture? And the second is, what are some strategies for leveraging student assets and ideas? How do we go about doing this? I've organized this session using the features of a classroom culture that supports equitable sense-making, a handout that comes from Open SciEd. The organizer can be found in your resource folder, and we're going to use it to pause and reflect several times during this session. So we'll start right now. Pause the video and take a few minutes to read each feature and its description. Use this time to do some self-reflection as to which feature or features you think is established in your classroom and which might need more attention. What evidence do you have for your thinking? The second page of the organizer will allow you to formalize your reflection before we dig into each feature and consider each of those features. In the alone zone, take a minute to capture your goals and rationale for each feature. Add any strategies that you use or have considered using in the last column. If you're working in a PLC, compare your goals and strategies with your colleagues. Discuss strengths and needs as a team. Pause the video to read over this organizer for features of classroom culture that support equitable sense-making. Think about what you do in your own classroom, what your goals are and your rationale. What are some strategies that you use? If you're working in a PLC, pause the video, allow everyone to reflect individually, and then share strengths and needs as a team. As I was trying to determine how to organize this session, I read an article that was entitled, "Some of You Are Smiling," that was published in the May-June 2022 issue of Science Scope, an NST journal, which is the audience is primarily middle school and high school teachers. The authors described the feature of classroom culture summarized on the organizer that we're using for reflection and idea capturing. In addition, the authors detailed the instructional strategies listed on this slide. They talked about how to establish and revisit norms, how to use different activity structures for students to share ideas, how to support discussion with talk moves, how to connect to students' lives and experiences, and how to support different forms of participation in the classroom. These strategies incorporate all the ideas I had outlined as necessary for student ideas, this attribute of sense making. So I'm going to use this to organize our experiences in this session. I've included a link to the article on your selected resources document in the pink section. There's some kind of error on the NSTA site that's prevented me from downloading this and including it in the folder, but you do have a link to the article. So first, we're going to dig in to the 5 strategies that support developing a classroom culture for sense making. You can pause the video after each of these strategies and discuss ways you do this and next steps to take. For students to take risk, and by risk, I mean being vulnerable to being wrong, to not feel like they're going to be made fun of or bullied because they don't know the answer, or get penalized by having a grade on something when they're just learning it. So we want to have a classroom that allows for risk-taking and students to share their ideas, a place that's supportive and safe. And that has to be developed and nurtured. So take just a minute and think of the ways you have created and supported this type of classroom culture. What strategies have been successful? What areas would you like to improve? If you're working in a PLC, you might set up a chart with the following headings on them. What are some current successful strategies for developing classroom culture? What are some areas that we'd like to improve in? What are some strategies to consider? So using this chart, any of you can add to your ideas and build on this as you move through this session. If you're working through this module individually, you can still think about successful strategies, where you'd like to improve, and then what are some new ideas or maybe twist on some of the things you're currently doing that might help cement a more supportive classroom culture for learning. One indicator of a classroom culture supportive of sense-making is the pronoun that the teacher and the students use when discussing the class. Instead of I or you, the classroom community identifies as we. We figure this out. We think this. We have a question. We're all in this together. What are some ways you've nurtured a culture of we? Share your thinking with a partner. We're going to be reading pages 34 through 37 in the Open Science Teacher Handbook. The bullets on the slide are the sections of those pages. So in thinking about establishing and revisiting cultural norms, the headings are like, well, what's the purpose and what are some big considerations for this? What are important questions to consider when establishing norms? And then what are some strategies for developing those norms and then revisiting them to reinforce those norms? The developers of the Open Science materials have done a terrific job of synthesizing and operationalizing the research on developing a classroom culture that supports sense-making. Pages 34 to 36 in the Open Science Teacher Handbook provide descriptions, rationales, and suggestions for supporting, developing, and nurturing classroom norms. Pause the video and read the descriptions of the norms summarized on the chart shown on the slide. This chart is on page 37 in the handbook. Open Science teachers have students tape this into their science notebooks for referencing. So how are these norms, like the ones you've used in your classroom, how are they different? What process do you use for establishing norms, for monitoring how successfully the class is utilizing them? If you're working in a PLC, share your thinking. How would having similar norms in science classrooms each year be beneficial or not for student learning? Add ideas to your PLC chart. So take just a minute to read those pages 34 to 36 and think about these questions as you read. If you're working in a PLC, allow each person time to read and then share thinking so that you kind of come to a collective understanding of classroom norms and how to support them. Once you've had time to read and discuss, start the video back again. So having a respectful, equitable classroom where we're committed to our community, we all are in this. It's about the learning. We're going to help each other. And we're going to keep moving our science learning forward because we work together to figure things out. Well, what's that look like in a classroom? So let's watch some videos from classrooms. And as you watch this montage from several lessons, jot down things that students are saying or doing and things that the teacher is saying or doing that demonstrates the norms of a classroom culture that you just read about. How you might use these norms and how you might monitor the use and effectiveness of the norms. So take a minute to get ready to capture your thinking. You may want to reference a chart on page 37 of the handbook as you watch the video.
One of the reasons we're sitting facing each other is because everyone's ideas are important here. All right, and you guys are noticing I'm not really giving you much information in this unit. Is that correct? Yes. So here's what I'm asking us to do now. I'm asking us to be listening to what other people are saying and be ready to respond to it. The first thing we're going to have people do today is present their models, their individual models that they were working on the last couple days. I've got a couple that I've selected, and I'm going to be projecting up here, and they're going to be sharing it. Who can read on the board the first bullet point? Someone read this out loud. I will go for it.
Listen as your classmates share their models. Are their models similar to yours or different from yours?
So as you're going to be sharing them, I really want you to think about what's similar and how they put there and what do they put that was different. You ready? You saw any?
I'm not yelling above you.
If you have it written down, read it.
I mean, I do. I just don't like it
Why not?
because
Read it first. Let me see it, Liz. Fabio.
I'm gonna.
Fabio, read off here as well. Read it. Okay.
Doesn't make sense.
What is the copper's job on the speaker? What does it do?
I think that, what is the what's part? What's the job? The copper. So we're talking about the copper that actually makes up the wire. Does that have a job? I think that's a really important question. It's made out of copper, right? We noticed it was the same material on both speakers, right? Maybe there's something to that. Why do you think it's copper, by the way? Anyone have any? Does it have to be copper? I don't know. Like maybe we should test something like that, right? Okay, put that up there. That's an important question. All right, you had that in your mind. No one else had a question like that. So when you have something that no one else has, that's not something to be embarrassed about, Markel. That's something that like might push us in the right direction, right? So be proud of that. All right, so I want to remind us, you want to just grab a stool or a table? I want to remind you guys of some of our expectations here. When we're doing this, we got to make sure we're respectful and listening to one another's ideas. We have some amazing ideas. Josh, you want to grab a stool or the table? First time we did this, I remember Markel had a question. I think I brought this up once or twice since. Remember? That you didn't want to share with us at all. Going into that copper about that copper coil, right? And it turns out like investing in that copper coil was really important, wasn't it? Yeah. So sometimes the best questions come from ideas that people maybe don't think are that you want to share them. So I'm going to encourage you, if you've got an idea, especially if it's different, to be sharing it with us. All right? Because sometimes those lead to the most learning. All right? I'm going to remind you of some moves we have up here. If you're getting stuck, if you say, I've got an idea, or what if we tried this? I've got here, if you're confused about someone else's idea, or you want to ask them something about their idea, or asking about how to prove that. Do we have evidence from one of our investigations, etc.? Okay? How is that force getting to that magnet? How is that force getting to that magnet?
guess like the power, I don't know. Like, like they're strong. That's what's like making them react. Because when the coil was like we said, the coil wasn't even that strong, so that's why it didn't react as much. But those magnets they react way more than the coil did. When it was connected to the battery, which made it magnet. Which made it a magnet.
I'm just talking with your group, because I want to hear some other people's voices. And so far, this isn't class ideas, this is Garvey's ideas. And I don't want to just be labeled Garvey's ideas. So I want to get some other people's ideas up here. Talk with your groups and discuss what you think is going on with that, okay? How can I write this up here? What should I say? Literally, the second I come over here, we start again. We're having no restraint. How should I write this up? Stop. Let's write down some expectations. A new page in your notebook. We're going to copy down some expectations a couple times because I don't think you guys are getting it. So we get to copy down expectations from scratch again. Turn a new page in your notebook. What are some expectations we have for group discussion? Well, what do you think we need the most work? What do you think is the hardest for us right now?
Ask questions, listen, and participate
Listen to others
more.
and eye contact.
Yeah, I really think, I mean, like, if you do these three, that's the basic part, right? And then that follows that you're going to start participating. But this one right here, I'm not going to write in Sharpie. This one right here, that's hard. It's not easy. And that's why a couple people are zoning out right now, because they're like, oh, I don't know, what if I ask the wrong question? What if I say something that's not perfectly right? But there have been all sorts of ideas that we've put out there that are incorrect, and that's okay, because we're learning, right?
So as you watched the video, you were able to kind of jot down some notes about what students were doing and saying, what the teacher was doing and saying. And let's take a minute just to kind of synthesize all of this and think about how the teacher supported equitable sense making throughout this series of lessons. What were some things that he did to promote the classroom culture and norms? What were some ideas that you think were particularly effective? And then what might be some suggestions you would have for this teacher based on this observation? So let's look back at the first two features of classroom culture that support equitable sense making. How do classroom norms support the engagement of all students? And how do classroom norms support students along with the teacher as knowers in the classroom? What evidence of this did you see in the classroom video? You might jot down some ideas or discuss those if you're working in a PLC with a partner or small group. take a minute to add to your notes about goals that you might have for who's engaged or excluded in a classroom activity, and who's treated as the knower in the classroom, and then some strategies or moves that you might take in your classroom. The next strategy that we're going to consider for supporting a classroom culture of we is the use of different activity structures for students to share ideas. Different activity structures can encourage students to share their ideas and reduce risk. For any one student, a particular activity structure may be more or less effective, which is why it's important to use different ones. Also, different activity structures need to be selected based on the learning goals. The different student interactions need to be intentionally planned, and students need to be provided instruction on expectations for the structures that are being used. We want to keep the students engaged and sharing ideas to help develop understanding. In the Science Scope article that I referenced earlier, the authors share 3 examples of activity structures for sharing ideas. You saw an example of the scientist circle in the classroom video you just watched. Sitting in a circle, facing each other, shifts the focus from the teacher, and signals that we all need to contribute to make sense. The scientist circle is similar to like a Socratic seminar or a shared inquiry that you might have used with junior gradebooks materials, where the teacher serves as the facilitator, only asking questions, maybe capturing the ideas from the group, and then ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to share. The anonymous share strategy that's mentioned in the Science Scope article involves collecting student work, like maybe their initial models, selecting a diverse group of those competing ideas, and then sharing them anonymously with partners in small groups. This could be done easily through the use of a digital platform like Google Drawing, where students take pictures of their work, submit it through the learning management system, and then annotate with the Google Drawing features. Or the teacher could take pictures and share, and then students respond to that way as well. Also, you could post those in the room and then use kind of a modified gallery walk where we look for certain things, provide feedback using Post-it notes, but we don't identify who the work is from. In a partner or a group share, students would share ideas with others in a pair or small group. As the ideas are shared out publicly to the whole group, students aren't allowed to share their own ideas, but instead they share ideas they heard from someone else. We're going to watch a clip from a video of the classroom where they're using another strategy that helps to encourage participation from all students called a talking stick. As you watch this classroom video, note what the students and the teacher are saying and doing. Note that the students are using a talking stick to ensure that everyone shares and listens. Afterwards, we'll take some time to consider how this small group activity structure supported equitable sense making and what the teacher needs to do to help make it more successful.
Okay, do you guys want to share your questions? Mine was more about one of the specific things of her problem, like I said, rapid heartbeat, I think. And I was asking how fast is her heartbeat, because like it was talking about the food entering, why the shortage of food was entering McKenna's bloodstream. I don't know how much was in her bloodstream.
Wait, can you say it a little bit louder? Like, about the bloodstream. I heard everything else, but like,
I was wondering how much food was entering McKenna's bloodstream.
I can answer that question with my model. Oh, okay then. So my model is just like the nutrients or the food, basically.
Wait, we haven't gone to round 2 yet.
Oh shoot. Oh yeah. Sorry.
Okay,
Wait, can I write your question down? How is the food affecting her? How is the shortage of food affecting McKenna?
okay. So, why?
No, your question. Oh, forget that. How much food molecules are entering McKenna's bloodstream?
My model, I can't draw, but basically,
I could draw. Do you like my drawing?
that's actually pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. So, my drawing is basically supposed to be the bloodstream, and then the different nutrients, and then just other things. So, no nutrients in the bacteria.
In the
In the
bloodstream?
bacteria. No nutrients in the bloodstream could cause fatigue because if there are no proper nutrients, if there's no proper nutrients in the bloodstream, your body won't have any energy to run off of. Difficulty breathing. If you aren't getting the energy you need, you will develop exhaustion, which leads to difficult breathing. Weight loss. I'm not so sure about this weight loss thing. It's just an inference. If nutrients isn't being absorbed or going through the body, what will the stomach feed off of? Your stomach could feed off of your fat and your muscle, which could cause weight loss. But I'm not so sure about that. And then rapid heartbeat. Again, with exhaustion, if you're exhausted, you could easily have a rapid heartbeat from no nutrients.
So I basically answered her question, right?
Yeah. What?
That basically answered her question.
Whose question?
Mine.
About?
The rapid heartbeat and how that affects, or how the bloodstream affects the rapid heartbeat.
Oh.
Thanks. Okay. Oh yeah, she answered my question. So well, I could still answer your question. So the food, or your question was like how much food is entering McKenna's bloodstream. So not all nutrients as they should. Like you know how how the nutrients when they go through the small intestine they get absorbed by a regular person. Yeah, not all the nutrients that a regular person absorbs, McKenna absorbs. So not as much as she should, not as much food as should be entering her bloodstream is entered. So like there's obviously less because she doesn't absorb different stuff like glucose, starch, all that stuff. So yeah, because and this happens because her small intestine is smooth, and instead of being like bumpy where it's easier to absorb more stuff, it's smooth where it's harder to absorb stuff. So yeah, that's
Narwhal. Let's go, buddy.
going normal.
You guys both answered my question.
But you have to explain your model.
So it seems to me now that I look at YouTube models that I didn't quite understand this, and
But what did you write?
I attempted to draw the symptoms aside from what was going on in her digestive system, like brain fog, like muscle cramps. And then
Cramps in your muscles.
that I don't.
Lightning.
I wrote muscle cramps, but
98 BPM,
But I don't
that's
know.
very, 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 very high.
It's actually
It's
pretty
high.
high.
that's
It's supposed to
high.
be 60 to 80.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 60 to 80. 98
Your
is,
normal heartbeat.
yeah.
So I actually didn't know. I
Oh,
just
you
wrote-
said 90. I thought you were looking at 55.
Oh dang. Oh, that'd be about accurate.
That's fast.
Yeah. So yeah, and you answered that question and that question and that. You answered all of them.
So take a minute to think about how this different activity structure in the small group using the talking stick had an impact on what students were saying or doing. And what do you notice the teacher saying or doing? Do you think this helped to support equitable sense making? And what are some things as a teacher you might do to make this more successful? So if you're working in a PLC, pause the video, take a few minutes to capture your thoughts, and then share those with your group. If you're working individually, take a minute and just capture your ideas and think about how this might support more equitable sense making in the classroom. What kinds of things worked well? And then what kinds of things might need to be improved to make this a more effective strategy? I know that many of you are implementing Kagan structures for cooperative learning, and I've included a PDF in the resources folder that describes a range of Kagan structures. As a PLC, share those structures that have been effective in your classroom and why you think they've been effective, and discuss how you select the structures and implement the structures successfully. You might want to add these structures, rationales, and implementation tips to your PLC chart or to your notes if you're working individually. So take a minute to think about some of the strategies or structures that you have in place that support more equitable sense making by students. Intentionally planning interactions is important for them to successfully advance student understanding. I tell my pre-service teachers to really limit whole group interactions to primarily just initial discussions of the phenomenon in order to generate lots of ideas and questions, and then carefully orchestrated consensus discussions. Otherwise, you really risk losing engagement of many of your students and not getting lots of ideas on the table. Intentional interaction and structures that support them are the first two features of the classroom culture that supports equitable sense making. Pause the video and add to your personal goals, rationale, and potential strategies on your classroom culture organizer. The next strategy we're going to explore is supporting discussion with talk moves. Carefully facilitated discussions that surface and value students' ideas can position students as knowers. Talk moves can support students in sharing ideas, listening carefully, digging deeper, and connecting to others' ideas. Students can be supported in contributing to collaborative discussions by reflecting periodically using a tool like a discussion self-assessment. There's an example in your resource folder. I put many resources for supporting discussion and talk moves in your resource folder and provided links for them on your selected resources document. However, that Open Science handbook, they've really done a nice job of synthesizing some important information and making it accessible. I just had to share this quote with you from STEM Teaching Tool number 48, which is also contained in your resource folder, because I really think it sums up the key reason supporting academic discourse is so important. Center your instruction around the idea that the person doing the talking is the person doing the learning. So access your Open Science Teacher Handbook, and then go to the Supporting Discussions section, which begins on page 38. If you're working in a PLC, letter off A, B, C, and D so that you can jigsaw the reading and summarizing of the information. As you read, be prepared to share a summary of what you read. Why is it important? And how do you do this, or how do you use this information? So as you read, think what, why, and how. Pause the video and allow time to read and discuss the sections listed on the slide. If you're doing this individually, also take time to pause this video and to read these pages. And again, think about what are some important ideas that you can gain from this. What are some things that reinforce things you're doing? What are some questions that you have or some new ideas that you take away from this? I want to take just a minute to share and point out some additional resources. The checklist that's shown on this slide is found in your resource folder. It comes from the Turk Talk Moves primer, which was adapted and was referenced in your Open Science handbook. You can use this checklist as a reminder of key talk moves and stems to share with students, or maybe as a monitoring tool to gauge how effective discourse is in your classroom. As you read that information in the handbook, you reviewed the discussion types that are shown on this slide in your jigsaw group or as you read it individually. The types, roles, and talk move stems are also uploaded to your resource folder as a separate handout for easy access and review. You may want to keep a copy handy when you're planning group interactions and discussions. Many teachers have made posters of this Communicating in Scientific Ways handout and posted them in their classrooms or made copies for students to keep in their notebooks. As part of the instructions for an activity and group interactions, I've often put a post-it by the talk moves that we're going to be focusing on as I verbally explain them or reinforce what we're doing and why we're doing it, or what are those expectations for communication. This is just a way to kind of keep it visual and as a good reference for students as they're having these conversations. This handout's also found in your resource folder. And recently, PIMSR's been working with elementary students across Kentucky in a range of different classrooms and settings, and work done by the BSCS group out of Colorado. One of the first things that teachers really latched onto as they've been thinking about how to make their instruction more phenomenon-driven and three-dimensional in nature has been these communicating in scientific ways. All the teachers involved in the project have this posted. Their students have it in their notebook. But the thing that I found really, really interesting from this is the students latched onto this very quickly. It's interesting to watch videos of these teachers' classrooms and to see the students using these and referencing it. And in fact, some of the fifth grade teachers who teach a unit in science and then teach a unit in social studies found that the students just naturally were taking these ways of communicating and transferring it right into the social studies setting. So the students find these valuable as well, because we know how to talk to each other. We supposedly know how to talk to each other and to listen, but academic discourse is different. And so really thinking about, well, what do you do when you're searching for new ideas? Or what do you do when you're reasoning from evidence or using a model to explain? What kinds of things might preface that or get you thinking along those lines? And I have another quote. So this is a quote that just kind of reminds us why it's so important to support discourse for learning. It is through student discourse and the interaction of different ideas that students construct meaning. So again, going back to this idea of sense making, thinking about our model of learning and how if the students are the ones that are actively interacting with the information, talking about it, figuring it out, it's not going to go into their long-term memory. Much of what you've read and shared about productive academic discourse and talk moves helps to foster the development of feature 2, the student as knower, and feature 3, different ways of knowing. Pause this video, take a few moments just to capture your goals, rationale, and strategies with respect to discourse and talk moves on your organizer. If you're working in a PLC, after each person's had time to record their individual thinking, share successful strategies from your own experiences and add those to your PLC chart. All students bring valuable life experiences that should be solicited and valued as part of the figuring out process. We know from our model of learning that in order to deepen learning, we have to help students make connections between new learning and previous learning. Uncovering experiences and ideas are also critical for using students' resources to advance learning. The information on this slide comes from a short paper from CAST. They were originally called the Center for Applied Special Technology, but now they just go by CAST, which can be found in your resource folder. Principles of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, can help us improve learning for all students, including populations who have been marginalized in science classrooms. Eliciting and connecting to students' experiences, their cultures, curiosities, and interest is critical for leveraging the assets learners bring to class and empowering students as knowers. The 3 brain networks are activated when we intentionally leverage these assets. So let's open the SciEd Teacher Handbook to pages 30 to 33. This section of the handbook contains materials or contains about how the Open SciEd materials have purposefully used these Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, principles. Even if you aren't using their curricular materials, just looking at the principles and how they've been enacted can provide you with many ideas for your own classroom. If you're working in a PLC, pause the video and discuss how each of you have been utilizing these principles to meet learners' needs and strategies that you found successful. Add these to your PLC chart. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of give you the overview of this anchoring phenomenon and then share with you a way that teachers who have used this anchoring phenomena in their 6th grade science classroom found ways to kind of tap into students' experiences and think about ways that they may have experienced something similar or have a related story to tell. So they begin the unit by playing this anchoring phenomenon where a climber has had a very scary experience on Mount Everest. The next part of introducing this anchoring video is to share a news report that details the experience on Mount Everest. Students are going to be figuring out what happened on Mount Everest and then just how predictable are these events. So they listen to a firsthand account, they've watched a news broadcast about it. The next step that the teacher makes as part of this anchoring phenomena routine is to get the students to provide related phenomena from their own experiences. And as the class proceeds in figuring out what happened on Mount Everest, they'll also apply what they're learning to these related phenomena and anything else they might be interested in figuring out. Sharing related phenomena helps students engage with the anchoring phenomena, and it provides connections to the things they already know. Plus, it leverages their experiences, their curiosities, and the interest of many students. So including time to share related phenomena and applying new ideas to explain them helps to support the transfer of learning into long-term memory. So just notice from this one classroom, the range of examples that students had that they've either experienced or they know about, and that they can go back to and relate their explanation for what happened on Mount Everest and how predictable that event was. Great way to make those connections and leverage students' experiences and their assets in the learning. STEM teaching tool number 58 provides additional ways to leverage and develop student interest. Take a minute to review the resource for ideas you might use, and then share those ideas in your PLC of some ways that you've done this and leverage and develop student interest. We began this video noting how using a sense-making frame for instruction is rooted in making the science classroom more equitable for all students. We're reminded almost daily of the inequities in our students' lives. And at least we can make our classrooms a little respite from some of these. So just think, being born into a racial majority group with high levels of economic and social resources, or into a group that has historically been marginalized with low levels of economic and social resources, results in very different lived experiences that include unequal learning opportunities, challenges, and potential risk for learning and development. So the things that we can do in our classroom that helps to leverage all that students bring is one of those ways at trying to get at some of the inequities that have persisted. Chapter 11 in a framework for K-12 science education is a chapter on equity and diversity. And it's one of the things that really spurred the development of the next generation science standards. In chapter 11, the writers explore equalizing opportunities to learn, developing inclusive science instruction, where we think about learning as a cultural accomplishment, relating youth discourses to scientific discourses. How do we build on interest and identity? And how do we leverage students' cultural funds of knowledge? What are ways we make the diversity in our classroom visible? And what's the value in multiple modes of expression? I've included chapter 11 in your resource folder, and I think it's worth taking the time to read through and gaining some insight, research, and suggestions for equalizing opportunities for students. So if this is an area that your school is actively working on, or your PLC finds this to be a great need, this would be a very useful chapter with a lot of practical information, as well as the research behind why this makes such a difference in student science learning. Many of the things that I've shared with you have come from the work of a group that put the STEM teaching tools together that began this process with the NSF grant. And one of those is Philip Bell, who's at the University of Washington. And many of his colleagues, he and his colleagues have spent much of their careers researching inequities in science and how to lessen them. So the next few slides I've taken from some of the materials that they put together in a PD module from a group that has an acronym of ACESSE, and all of these can be found on the STEM Teaching Tool website. I've included the entire PowerPoint in your resource folder because you may find some additional information on there very useful, and some other activities that are included, some that you want to work through together. But as part of leveraging student assets, we really want to clarify what is meant by culture in the education literature. Culture is not a trait that some people have and others do. Instead, it's a way in which human beings engage and make sense of the world as we participate in our everyday activities of our communities. Culture reflects socially and historically organized ways of living and making sense of life, or what might be called sense-making repertoires. Often cultural worlds of youth from non-dominant communities are viewed from a deficit perspective rather than a source of increased rigor and relevance. So I know, having lived most of my life in Eastern Kentucky, I know that the culture that I have and that many of my students have, and their experiences are very different from those maybe in an urban or a suburban community. I can leverage my knowledge of this and help my students connect to science. So being aware of what culture is and all that it can bring to the learning and how it might look different for students from different cultures is really one of the first steps in leveraging this to support students' sense making. And culture and science education can be further clarified, and it may be helpful in explaining why some students have the views or the understandings that they have. Cultural specifics related to science might involve their experiences, the observations they've made, how they narrate phenomena. It may involve the extent to which they find scientific topics salient or interesting, how familiar they are with design and working through failure from an engineering perspective, how they communicate and how they view their elders, and specifically how they impose questions or engage in argumentative and explanatory talk and writing. Cultural diversity benefits science, and it benefits science learning. Research shows that it's crucial to approach the different cultural ways of knowing that youth bring to science learning from an asset perspective and not a deficit. It's like, what do kids bring to the learning and how can I leverage that learning? In thinking about what students bring to the learning, then how can science instruction be inclusive to those interests and goals of all students and their communities? How can science instruction connect the science students learn in class to experiences outside the classroom? What are ways that make it personal or make it relevant from a cultural perspective? How can science instruction build on students' experiences with natural phenomena and make connections between everyday and disciplinary knowledge, discourse, and ways of knowing? How can science instruction help students leverage or extend personal identities in relation to science? If we sincerely want one of our most important goals to be having our students exit our K-12 system scientifically literate, then it's imperative that we really look at some of the equity issues and some of the social justice issues that might be preventing that. STEM teaching tool number 31 provides some suggestions for launching STEM investigations that build on student community interest and expertise. One technique that's described in the STEM teaching tool is called self-documentation. I kind of found self-documentation as a way to really maybe even expand on that driving question board once you've introduced the anchoring phenomena. In this process of self-documentation, we would introduce the phenomena, and then we would ask students to photo document aspects of their everyday lives, things that are related to the phenomena or even maybe to the larger topic at hand. And then they bring their photographs back in and we share those, cluster them, categorize them like we were doing those driving questions into similar activities. Then we can identify which activities are possible areas for investigation for the unit or what knowledge we might gain from students' experiences in those activities. Then we can support students engaging in these investigations related to their focus, and then arrange for students to present the results to members of the community or other STEM experts. So for those of you who have really been embracing project-based learning and thinking about how do we make student learning more public, how do they share their findings and products, self-documentation may be a component you want to consider really bringing in and really leveraging all that diversity that's in the classroom and the diverse experiences that students have. Additional information about photo documentation can be found on that STEM teaching tool as well. And then it contains some additional links that would give you some other ideas. Another strategy that's in that STEM teaching tool 31 is this idea of an exit ticket that not just gauges my understanding of the concept or the learning for the day, but periodically ask kids to share how engaged they've been within the experiences in the unit. So it's a quick way to gather information and adjust experiences and examples to increase engagement and then to leverage those funds of knowledge. So just using a Google form to quickly gather this information look at it across a class can be very helpful. So some of those formats were really looking at this cultural assessment. What do our kids bring to the learning? And then really leveraging that to help students improve sense making would be this idea of self-documentation that shows connections to everyday life, periodic surveys to surface instruction-related interests and life experiences, use of exit tickets about engagement and learning, just to get a sense for where the students are, and setting it up anonymously to make that safe space for students and get you maybe more realistic information from students. And then just those conversations that we have with our kids as we get to know them. So as a way to kind of sum up this cultural and social justice connection, we really want to think about all science as being understood as a cultural accomplishment. And what counts as learning and what types of knowledge is seen as important are closely tied to those communities' values and what's useful to that community. And so that's, again, thinking about the anchoring phenomena that we use and how we leverage all the expertise that's within our community as an important way for leveraging student ideas. Recently, there was an article in the Science Teacher. It was in the July-August 2022 issue that was about using this universal design for learning solutions for common barriers in the science classroom. I've included this article in your resource folder, and I just wanted to mention it here because the article gives you some very specific classroom examples of how the teacher planned and utilized multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression at the high school level. So often that's kind of an area that there's not as much information on. So I just wanted to call your attention to this particular article that's in your resource folder for some additional information. These strategies that we've kind of quickly perused support the development of features 3, ways of knowing, and 4, what's practiced in the science classroom. So pause this video for just a moment to capture your goals, rationale, and strategies for these features in your classroom on the organizer. Again, if you're working in a PLC, give each person time to capture their ideas individually, and then share those that are relevant and capture them on your PLC chart. All classrooms are diverse. They include learners who have a disability, emergent multilingual learners, learners who come from diverse backgrounds, both cultural backgrounds and linguistic backgrounds, learners with diverse interests, skills, and preferences. However, in schools, we tend to privilege certain forms of expression and participation. We do want all of our students to be good communicators of science, but to help students learn science, we want to support a range of forms of participation as students are in that figuring out phase of the learning. But we don't just want to privilege reading and writing as ways to communicate information and to learn about it. We want to think about other ways other forms that students can participate, again, to leverage the expertise and to gain from that diversity that's in the classroom. This is a quote from the NST publication, Helping Students Make Sense of the World. This book focuses on the science and engineering practices. And in order to help students figure out a phenomenon using those science and engineering practices, we have to be attuned to the variety of ways students make their thinking visible. So by attending closely to what students actually say and do in science, teachers can expand the relationships that are possible among themselves, their students, and science. In this way, they can begin to create more equitable opportunities to learn in science for historically underserved students. So again, not just privileging one way of expressing understanding or coming to understand in order to open it to more students can be important. In addition to that quote, how do we notice and leverage student resources? So creating these equitable learning opportunities depends critically on our skills in seeing and hearing students' ideas and reasoning as connected to science. Maybe they're not using the most precise science term, or maybe their representation isn't quite as accurate, but what can we garner from that? What do the kids bring that we can use to build from that? The sense-making repertoires of students from historically underserved communities can be misread as signs of disrespect, confusion, digression, lack of knowledge, or disengagement. And so again, understanding our students' background, their culture, their ways of expressing themselves is really important in helping us see where they are with the science learning, and then leveraging that to help them have a more sophisticated understanding, and then being able to communicate that in greater and more sophisticated ways. So those UDL principles can really help us differentiate experiences as needed for the diverse learners in our classroom. This particular handout is found on page 30 in the Open SciEd Teacher Handbook. And in addition to that, is also included like an observation chart. This is a way to really kind of gauge what's happening in your classroom, maybe have someone come in and observe, or just you reflecting on the lesson. And are those things in there? Have you addressed these different UDL principles for the varied learners that are in your classroom? So it's a nice self-reflection tool on how effective we might be in utilizing these three principles of UDL. The resource that's shown on this slide is a handy reminder of the different resources that students can use for sense making and implications for instruction. Since our goal during the figuring out phase of learning is to determine where each learner is in their thinking and their conceptual understanding, it's important to be cognizant of all the ways that kids can express their learning, can express their thinking, so that we can support them. So non-academic language, not just the kids not using the most precise vocabulary, but listening to what they say and utilizing what students say can help us gauge where they are and help put that correct terminology with student understanding. How students gesture can help us think about how they're seeing those relationships or those connections, and maybe even mechanisms to those interactions, perhaps in a system. And then allowing for multiple modes of expression, for kids to be able to use multiple ways to show their understanding and to express that understanding, are things that we really want to keep in mind and leverage those for student sense making. We want to provide opportunities for students to use many forms of their linguistic resources, from gesture, native languages, drawings, as ways to communicate thinking. Participation can include speaking, but also nodding, hand signals, body language, and other physical expressions of engagement. We know that often concept understanding kind of parallels language development. So as our conceptual understanding gets more sophisticated, the language we use to express that often gets more sophisticated. So how do we leverage that for our students? Again, pause the video and record your goals, rationales, and strategies for using the resources that students bring to foster these features 3 and 4 of classroom culture. Share ideas with your PLC and capture key ones on that PLC chart. You may find it useful at this point just to capture questions you have or things that you need to dig into a little bit more. The NGSS lesson screener, or the equip peer review rubric, which is much more elaborated, kind of provides a useful summary of what we should be seeing more of in our classrooms with respect to students' ideas and sense making. So just looking at this overview, a quick look at NGSS lesson design, you'll see that it's kind of divided into 2 big chunks. Those shifts from the next gen science standards, explaining phenomena, designing solutions, use of the 3 dimensions, development of those 3 dimensions, and then integrating the 3 dimensions for learning and assessment, as well as what are just general features of quality design. So how do the materials provide for relevance and authenticity? How do the materials provide for leveraging students' ideas? And how do the materials provide for building on students' prior ideas? I know as a member of the peer review panel that uses the EQUIP rubric to provide feedback and evaluate materials that have been submitted, you really have to dig into these and think about all the kinds of ways that you might support this with students and what would it look like and how could the materials further support teachers in developing these things in the classroom. So let's kind of zero in on that feature of quality design E, student ideas, and think what it should look less like and what it should look more like. Because I think the column on the more like side is one that can really help us think, well, what would I do? What would those materials contain? What are some of those things that I should be looking for? So when I'm thinking about students' ideas, then the classroom discourse should focus on the students being the ones expressing and clarifying ideas, not the teacher being the person in the room telling the kids, being the source of all information. It should look like students having opportunities to share their ideas and feedback with each other directly, as we saw in that video with the students in the small group and the talking stick. It should allow, we should see artifacts. It should generate artifacts that include elaborations like written, oral, pictorial, even motions, gestures, kinesthetic, of the reasoning behind their answers. And give students an opportunity to show how their thinking changes over time. Additionally, those materials should provide support for teachers. And how do you elicit this? What kinds of talk moves might you use? What might be a grouping structure that you could use for this? To wrap up session 4, I want us to think about how supporting trust, risk-taking, and equity in classrooms is challenging, but it's essential for scientific sense-making. The 4 features of classroom culture highlight a focus on both what and who is valued in the classroom. The instructional strategies offer suggestions on ways to support these elements to create a community of we, because all ideas are valued and we figure it out together. So as you participated in this module, I hope you've had a chance to reflect on ways that you leverage students' thinking to support sense-making, and the importance of establishing and maintaining that supportive classroom culture, that culture of we, where we're comfortable in being wrong, in taking risks, in sharing our thinking without fear of being ridiculed by the teacher or others in the classroom, and sincerely embracing the diversity that's there and what we can all bring to the learning, as well as a range of strategies that you can use to leverage those assets that students bring. What do they know? What can we build from? What ideas do they have? Not what they lack, but what they bring, and how can we build from those? As well as an opportunity for you to reflect on things that you're doing and share strategies with each other of how you've been able to maintain and establish this classroom culture and the range of strategies that you use in your own classroom. So once again, if you would get your sense-making plan of action organizer, just to take a moment to really summarize and reflect on your strengths and needs with respect to leveraging students' ideas. What resources do you have? You might even take this as an opportunity to look through those resources that I've added in the folder that I didn't reference during this session, and others that you might need. And then what's the next step for you and a time frame for implementing, and how will you know how effective this has been? So pause the video, take the opportunity to reflect and plan. Session 5 in our 5-part series on sense-making will be focused on exploring ways to help students leverage the science and engineering practices to support sense-making. So it's with this 5th session that we will have looked at all those critical attributes of sense-making and kind of put the pieces together, because in session 5, we'll go through a learning experience ourselves that's going to utilize many of these strategies that we've been talking about, as well as how critical the use of and development of those science and engineering practices are to students' sense-making. So thank you for joining me in this particular session.